Well, welcome to another edition of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My name is Mark Powell, and I'm the convener of the National Journal for the Presbyterian Church of Australia. And my very special guest with me today is Dr. Augusto Zimmermann. Augusto is the Professor and Head of Law at Sheridan Institute of Higher Education. He's also a former Associate Law Dean in Research at Murdoch University and a former Commissioner with the Law Reform Commission of Western Australia. Augusto, what a great pleasure it is to have you.
Thanks, Mark. It's a real pleasure to talk with you.
Now, Augusto, I ask this of all my guests, but before we get into your real area of expertise, can you please tell us about something of how you personally came to faith in Jesus?
Look, I came from a Christian family. I have a Christian background, but really I discovered Jesus when I was doing my master's in Rio de Janeiro, back in Rio when I lived there. I did my master's, and I always had the chance to visit the chapel and read the Bible. And that's when I had a real encounter with the Lord, initially progressing into becoming a Baptist. But when I landed in Australia, I was introduced to a wonderful minister of the Presbyterian Church called David Mitchell from Tasmania. And he told me about a wonderful minister close to my place in Clayton, where I lived, because I was there close to Monash doing my PhD. And that's when I became a Presbyterian, a very passionate Presbyterian. And I ended up serving the Presbyterian Church as a member of the Church and Nation Committee, which is the policy committee of an ethics committee in many ways of the Presbyterian Church in Victoria. And so my journey has been a long one, and I have been trying to use my legal academic skills to advance the kingdom in Australia and to serve the Lord in my capacity.
Yeah, you've had quite an illustrious professional career, and I know since the time you've been in Australia, there's been enormous changes to the Australian society. What do you think have been some of the factors that have produced or brought about this change?
Well, look, we have become a less Christian society. People have started to embrace a different worldview. And I think this has led even I would say that this would actually lead to problems within the church itself, when some people seem to have a very bizarre, I would say, belief in government as the ultimate savior and our masters. And that's, in my opinion, a form of idolatry. But also connect this with lack of faith, because they tend to believe that the state is now the primary instrument of salvation. These idols always disappoint us. And Tim Keller put it quite well in that book, Counterfeit Gods, that's when you actually put priorities in the wrong places. And then if you actually put the state as your ultimate Lord and Savior, you are begging for trouble, especially when the state is not properly established with a proper system of checks and balances and separation of powers. Our constitutional framework has never been perfect, but at least we had decent people who used to embrace a little bit more, I would say, to be mild on that, our Christian values and principles. But that's no longer the case. And they are using the instruments that are available to them in order to implement a project that is utterly destructive of the rule of law and the protection of our God-given fundamental rights and freedoms that are under a massive attack in Australia at this present moment.
Yeah, I think we saw a real flashpoint, didn't we, with COVID? And I know you've been very outspoken about this. You've written extensively on this. In summary, what do you think Christians need to learn and take away from that particular period in Australian history?
Well, look, I think some people are now learning from their own mistakes, and there are so many individuals, characters who now regret to have taken this leap of blind faith. And that was basically to believe that the government's always there with good intentions. When I was a commissioner, one thing that scandalized me is the fact that some of these characters who are in positions, very strong, powerful positions of power, they believe in a pro-death agenda. They talk about things such as the need to reduce population, about climate change, and saving Mother Earth. One particular premier here in Western Australia seemed to believe that Western Australia was overpopulated, just to see the level of stupidity. And when you actually have these sort of interactions, you wouldn't be so stupid to believe that these people want to necessarily save lives when the health minister in Western Australia is well known, or notoriously known, for her advocacy for abortion on demand and assisted suicide. So how on earth a person who has developed her career supporting the extermination of innocent people will ever be wanting to save our lives, And what really amazes me is that so many Christians don't understand human nature and do not understand what power can do. Of course, that some people might start the political career with good intentions, but you know what? Hell, first of all, is paved with good intentions. And another thing is that some people can get power over their heads, and power corrupts. And Lord Acton was very clear that power corrupts, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. Since we do not have separation of powers in the proper place in Australia, judges are appointed by politicians and not necessarily by merit. There is so much concentration of power that we're actually begging for a problem. And I think there is a need now to rethink our constitutional framework and separate these powers in a better way so that we can actually apply biblical principles in order to fix what is so terribly wrong at the moment.
Yeah, I know there's one really practical thing that you're doing here, and that's the establishment of a Christian law school. Can you explain how that's come about and why it's so important?
Well, look, this would be a law school that will have regard for equipping not only Christians, but whoever is interested in acquiring a proper legal education to be agents of justice, agents of the rule of law, because so many members of the legal profession do not know even what it means. Most lawyers in Australia know basically nothing about common law history and jurisprudence, and they can easily prove my point when we engage in a conversation with him. There are so many lawyers that tend to be very arrogant, but they have never actually learned common law history. They have never heard of Sir Edward Cook. They don't even know who Sir Edward Cook was. They have never heard of Lord Bracton or Blackstone. So they are fake common lawyers. They are just legal practitioners who are capable of writing an affidavit. So how about if we actually form and equip a generation of people who will understand our constitutional law and common law traditions, common law rights and constitutional rights. I think it's very important to have a law school that equips them to uphold the rule of law and to be able to be agents of the protection, I would say, of fundamental rights and freedoms. So my goal is to protect Australia and to have lawyers who know how to do the job properly and have a passion for justice and human rights.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I always admire about you is you're not just a committed academic and you've published prolifically, but you're also a passionate advocate in the public square. What is it that you think, Augusto, makes you so unique in that space? What is it that drives you?
Well, look, I came to Australia perhaps thinking that God was giving me a wonderful gift to have a peaceful and quiet life, but I have never had such things here. I think things have deteriorated quite quickly over the last years. But when I came to Australia, I landed in Melbourne to do my PhD, and I knew that this would lead to disaster when I interacted with some people, academics and members of the elite, including people at church, who seemed to have such a blind faith in government. And I think because things apparently worked quite well, and they thought, governments are benevolent entities, and because they know nothing about history, they don't know that government has been the primary killing machine over the last centuries, and just in the 20th century, governments killed more than 200 million people. And some of the worldviews that have led to this terrible outcome, this tragic outcome, they are now being recycled. They can be like based on the death cult of so-called global warming. They can be based on socialistic ideas, and communism killed more than 120 million people in the last century alone. So, I mean, we are basically asking for trouble. And because people are becoming less Christian, there will be an expectation also that the moral standards will change and they start to behave in a way that is not necessarily comfortable to the maintenance of a constitutional system based on the protection of rights and limited government.
Yeah, I know, Augusto, you've spoken a lot about Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, for instance. Um, I wonder how profound you would say that is in shaping the rule of law or a sense of justice, albeit injustice or injustice in our society. And what threats do you see coming over the hill in that regard?
Look, Section 18C is an instrument of intolerance and bigotry. What people do not understand is that when the threshold is so low, and basically saying that even if you say if you say something that's a truthful statement, but that can hurt the feelings of others, you're inviting for trouble because guess what? Only very intolerant people will be offended by another person's personal comment on a subject, whatever the subject might be. And then you see the case of two students in Queensland at QUT University who got into trouble for fighting against racism. They wanted to attend a lab that was designed to assist only one particular racial group. And when they said, look, the lab's not being used, I'm a white person. Can I please attend this lab, enter into this lab just because I need to do my homework? And they wanted to use the computer facilities of this university, and they were kicked out on the basis of the color of their skin. And they said that this was quite ironic because the university is supposed to be fighting against racism by enforcing racism and by discriminating people on racial grounds. And that was a very decent comment, and I tend even to agree with the comment. But they got into serious trouble because of that, and they were accused themselves of being racist by very, I would say, intolerant characters. And what makes it quite amazing is that Section 80C is an instrument for bigots and intolerant people, highly intolerant people, to claim to be offended. So guess what? The more I feel offended, the more I am the bigot, not the other person. Because if you live if you have a concern or a regard for democracy and free speech, you would accept people to hold different opinions. And that's why I always think that some Christians actually go the wrong way when they want to have the what could amount to the reestablishment of blasphemy law by stealth. I don't think it's a good idea to be persecuting or silencing people who happen to disagree from us even, because it's important to be able to have a robust and respectful dialogue with the other side. And in this marketplace of ideas, we hope and pray that our ideas can prevail. But democracy requires free speech. And rather than wanting anti-discrimination laws extending to our protection, you should actually do the very opposite and require or demand even free speech and freedom of association for all, including the churches.
Yeah, I wonder, Augusto, what advice would you have legally, particularly as a Christian academic, on how Christians can respond to laws such as 18C? Is it that we request the government to just simply rescind it, or is it that we protest? What is the godly response here?
Well, look, the most important thing is that there is no international instrument available to the Common of Parliament to have reduced free speech in such a drastic or radical manner. Nothing in international law, no treaty or convention would say that people cannot feel offended. So the threshold is so low that it is actually impossible to be justified on constitutional grounds. So I think we do need to actually appeal to biblical principles, even though it can be good to have such a conversation amongst fellow believers. But if you actually have to challenge this legislation at the level of a secular court, I think it would be better to say that this provision clearly is a violation of the Constitution, because there is no way the external affairs power could serve to such a purpose, because a legislation can only be passed by the federal parliament if there is a clear international instrument allowing that to be so. And there is no international law saying that people cannot have their feelings touched. And so that the threshold is so low that it is rendering the provision utterly unconstitutional. And that is so even in combination with the implied freedom of political communication, constitutional freedom that has been acknowledged by the High Court since the 1990s, saying that political communication is a right of the citizen that is derived from a system of representative government. So you cannot have democracy without this freedom to communicate your ideas freely and openly in the political arena.
Yeah, I wonder, Augusto, another really big issue coming over the hill for Australians is debate around religious freedom. Again, what is at stake here, and how should Christians respond or champion their rights and the freedom associated with that coming up?
Yeah, so look, there was an attempt by the Morrison government to create a Religious Discrimination Act. And I found this to be extremely dangerous, because they would transfer the power to decide on such matters to one of the human rights commissioners. So they would appoint perhaps a character from the Uniting Church or whatever to make these decisions. And then it could actually entirely backfire. I don't think we should be having the right to not be discriminated. I think we should have everyone the right to be free to even select on religious grounds. I think it's quite dangerous to use this word of anti-discrimination, because do you know what? It's part of freedom of association. It's part of democracy to have a highly pluralistic society where people will join groups, such as, for instance, political groups. That's why the Labour Party probably is never going to employ a person who votes for the Liberals. It would be bizarre to expect that the Labour Party would choose a person who hates the Labour Party to work in their offices. So, I mean, why this is actually not extended to religion? Why, if I join the soccer league, I'm not going to try to change the rules so that they can start playing rugby instead. So it makes no sense to me whatsoever. So this is actually to de-atomize, basically to atomize people. Actually didn't use the proper language here. It's to actually desocialize people and make them an isolated individual. So the goal is basically to sorry, the goal is basically to destroy these organizations, these groups, so that you become an isolated individual at the mercy of the will and the desires of the ruling class, and the ruling class that controls government. So the ultimate goal is to make us more vulnerable to totalitarianism. Communist regimes, any totalitarian regime, the first thing they do is to undermine these social tiers that are placed between the individual and the state, so that the state has total and full and direct control over the individual.
Mm. Yeah, it seems one of the other major threats that's taking place currently in Australia, and it's proceeded through Victoria, recently through New South Wales, but soon to be through all the other states as well. It seems inevitable, is the gay conversion therapy laws. What's your reflection on that, and how should Christians respond there?
Well, this is quite interesting because it's just saying that this can only go one way. It's almost like a religious approach. And it's the faith that people have the right to uh, decide on gender fluidity. And so some people will decide that they are not any more comfortable with their bodies, and they will have then they will receive the license of the government to undergo irreversible and very difficult surgeries. But if that is not a religion, I don't know what it is, because it's actually one way. If the person feels that he made a bad choice and he wants help and he's seeking help, he's not going to be allowed to have such an assistance, because the government is very clear that an attempt to reconvert, or for this person to actually develop an appreciation for his own sexual identity, then that's going to be considered a form of undesirable bigotry, even. And the doctor who is involved in the process will be severely punished. So, in many ways, this looks like a religion to me, because it's actually imposing a particular worldview and creating a society where the state dictates the rules, and it's not going to tolerate any dissent, and any dissent will be punished as a heretic, as a person who deserves to be going to hell. And that's a very dangerous approach, but it makes me wonder whether this is not a religious one.
Yeah, Augusto, a comment or a question that I've been asked a lot by people, and I'd love to get your answer on it because I think it'll be much better than mine. And that is, with the religious discrimination bill and associated gay conversion therapy laws, how does that relate to Section 116 of the Australian Constitution about the free exercise of religion? Does Section 116 of the Constitution, should that overrule any religious discrimination bill, or is it not appropriate legislation in this case?
It's certainly not appropriate. It's definitely a problem when it comes to respect, regard for the relevant provision in the Constitution, because the exercise of freedom of religion, it's about the non-interference of government in these affairs. The idea of church and state separation is basically to separate us from government intervention in the affairs of the church. And then you have Christian schools and establishments who want to actually develop a proper religious ethos to their institutions. They were created for such a purpose. And what they do not understand is that when we embrace the Christian faith, we develop a holistic approach. And I think these interference on our institutions are going to create more conflict, a more divisive society. It's going to be impossible to be for parents to send their kids to Christian institutions and have the confidence that they're going to learn from a proper biblical or Christian perspective, because the national curriculum already causes the trouble by imposing a worldview or an agenda that's not entirely compatible with the tenets of biblical Christianity. So this is only part of the process of aggravating the situation and making us, for instance, when we develop institutions such as Sheridan, for instance, where I work, and the Baptist education establishment here, to not be able to select their staff properly, and to be eventually forced to employ individuals who do not necessarily share the same Christian orientation. And that's why it would be perhaps not even impossible for one day one of these staff members deciding to become a Satanist, to not be, for the institution to be prevented from dismissing him or her. So it's such a slippery slope towards the abolition of Christian education and Christian institutions that only a person who is very naive wouldn't be able to see.
Yeah, I want to come back to the Sheridan Law Institute because I think it's a wonderful initiative, and I'm sure there'd be people out there listening to this that'd be very interested in being a part of it. But before we get to that, can I just change track a little bit and talk about The Voice? Because I know you were very outspoken as a critic, as a Christian critic of The Voice. It was robustly, defeated at the referendum. But why do you think that was such a threat to the Australian legal system?
Well, definitely, because it would create a third chamber in Parliament that would be constituted on basis of culture or ethnicity. And that completely undermines the idea of everybody being treated equally before the law. But not only that, it would be a discriminating of the Aborigines. It would be seriously racist, in my opinion, because it's basically saying that Jacinta Price, for instance, doesn't belong to Parliament, and she should perhaps join the consultative body that they were just about to create. So this is really cruel, and it's basically using the Aborigines for the purpose of advancing their destructive agenda of undermining social cohesion, undermining the rule of law, which is based on the idea of all being equal before the law, and entrenching racism and racial discrimination in Australia by so severely persecuting and discriminating the Aborigines in Australia. So this is so terribly racist to actually say to the Aborigines that they have to go elsewhere, they have to belong to a consultative body, which will be used and would be used for the purposes of further undermining not only the fundamental rights of the Aborigines, but to undermine the rights of every single citizen in this country.
Yeah. Now, if I can, Augusto, I'm sure there'd be a lot of people interested in the law institute that you're creating. Can you tell us a little bit about that? When it's starting, even costs, how to be involved, how to find out more?
Well, look, the Sheridan has already started. We opened the business school. I'm now the chair of the research committee. We have a department or a school, better saying, of education. We have a Bachelor of Arts, and I'm now, together with my colleagues, developing majors in politics, in economics, and philosophy. So I'm very excited. It looks amazing. And we got the approval from Texas to open the law school for 7 years, which means that the Texas, which is the government agency, the federal agency, loved our application. And they gave us the maximum possible period, then, of course, to be renewed every 7 years. But that's the sign that the project is amazing. And it was highly regarded by the relevant federal agency. But now, we depend on the work of the Legal Practice Board, and they will have to give us the approval, I expect so. And the only missing link now is for the Legal Practice Board to not disturb the project and to understand that TAXA saw the project as utterly desirable and a very good one indeed. I'm not surprised because we have a great team working with me. We are going to inevitably have the best law school in Australia because social capital is always the most important thing. If you employ the right people, we inevitably are going to become the best law school in Australia. And of course, there are some vested interests that are not very happy with the establishment of a decent law school. So we should continue to pray that the Legal Practice Board is going to do the right thing. And it's taking too long for my taste, many years. And so I still hope and pray that a decision will be made soon because I don't see any reason whatsoever, since we have the approval of tax already and you have developed what I regard to be a very impressive project, to have any obstruction for the establishment of the law school, hopefully by next year. So that's what I hope and pray and expect to happen, and I'll be very disappointed if that's not the case. But
Yeah.
in this current age and day and age, merit is not the only thing, and unfortunately there are some other factors involved.
Yeah, it's an incredibly exciting project, and yeah, I'd really encourage people to keep it in their prayers. It'd be just wonderful to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, please, I
Just one
think it's very
final,
important for our listeners to pray for this project. Thank you,
mm,
Mark.
yeah, one final question, if I can, because you are a prolific author. I'm just amazed at the output that you create. Can I ask you a personal question here? How do you do it? What's the discipline? What's the secret to being
Well, I
as
think
prolific as you are?
I think it's the miracle of the multiplication of books and articles. I actually have this commitment, this passion to serve God, and I'm very thirsty for justice. And when I read the newspaper, I get so upset that the only way that I can relax is by writing on what I have witnessed or read. So it's a way to relax as well, I must say, when I express my opinions. But, expressing opinions can be quite dangerous. So I advise everyone, including yourself, Mark, to have author's policy that gives you protection against defamation laws, because now the government is in the business of silencing us. But nobody's going to do such a thing. We have God on our side, and we are going to ultimately prevail. So this is actually motivated by my love for the Lord, and the love that motivates me to do these things. They are never going to stop me as a result. So I'll continue to fight, and we need to support one another. And I think I do so out of love for Jesus, love for my community, and the certainty and confidence that our victory is assured. And we are going to be victorious because with God, nothing is impossible. all things are possible with God.
Hmm. Yeah, amen. And I really look forward to in the future hearing more. Maybe when the law school is, completely opened and all the courses, we'll have to chat again, and you can promote what you're doing there, because I think it's just so needed for the Australian society. Augusto, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you've written many books. I think most of them can be found at Connor Court, can't they?
That's
Um,
right. They could be found with Court, and I hope that the Baptists here open a precedent for us Presbyterians, and then they can one day set up our own university. I think it's time for us to move from high school and start to think about tertiary education, because the kids are losing their faith when they go to universities. In order to protect our Presbyterian children, we definitely need to think now about higher education, tertiary level education, and see if we can actually have more Christian universities established in this nation. I think it's very important.
yeah. Yeah, amen. Well, thank you so much, Augusto, for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed this latest edition of AP's Profiles in Christian Living, and I look forward to seeing you next time.